Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. My name is Ivory, and you are tuned in to the Embracing Neurodiversity podcast, where I share my personal journey of embracing and enhancing the experience of my amazing son who is on the spectrum. Through this journey, I've discovered a lot about myself and continue to grow every day. My goal is to provide you with some useful insights and stories that will inspire you in your own parenting journey. Thank you for tuning in. She goes on to write that it was only after this couple were willing to see how their negativity stemmed from their basic inability to accept their son that they embarked on the process of transformation, a process that required them to confront their anxiety about their child's differences. As they became aware of their conscious patterns, they began noting how they dumped these on their child, who then acted out these patterns, thereby causing them more problems. You see the cycle here? It's a very basic concept, but one that is often hard for us to practice. But if we think about it on a basic level, when we engage with a loved one, when we feel accepted and safe in their presence, we are more inclined to listen, to acquiesce, to give them acceptance and safety in return. But when we enter a space with someone where we feel judged or resented for various reasons, we become defensive and we begin to act out the same judgments that they had perceived of us. We begin to inevitably act them out, whether we're aware of it or not. Dr. Shefali continues to talk about when it comes to acceptance that while we may not endorse a particular behavior, we must always unequivocally and wholeheartedly endorse our children's right to be who they are in their core state. Accepting our children enables us to raise them without judgment, dealing with them from a neutral state. Neutrality and objectivity is probably the best place to be in general when it comes to just functioning in life, because you never want to be too high, you never want to be too low. It's never good when people want to put you on a pedestal, but it's never good when people quote unquote want to cancel you either. So either end of the metaphorical spectrum when it comes to emotions and highs and lows, the best place to operate in is a space of neutrality, especially when you are operating with others and when you are on the journey of accepting your child. There needs to be a process of observation of your child in order to accept them, and the observation should be through a lens of neutrality and not objectivity, which means intentionally disrobing yourself of perhaps social norms that we have been taught. Responding to them as they need to be responded to instead of in a manner reflective of our own past conditioning requires unequivocal surrender to the wisdom of who they are yet to become, and what they can teach us about ourselves in the process. She also goes on to say how there's nothing passive about acceptance. For many of us, perhaps we think that acceptance is this idea of, okay, I'm washing my hands of this. I'm just going to let it be. Let my child figure it out. That is actually quite the opposite. She mentions that acceptance can't just be an intellectual decision, but must involve our entire heart and mind. Acceptance looks like when we see that our child is hurting and is struggling in a particular area, or feeling a human emotion that is painful, that we don't seek to take it away, but we help them sit with it and to process it, right? That is not a passive act. That is actually an incredibly active act. And again, in order to do that, we have to be in a place where we can provide that for ourselves, to sit in our uncomfortable emotions, to sit in our painful moments, right? And allow them to teach us the lesson that they need to teach us. I spoke about the importance of crying and even seeing your own child cry. For example, I'm always leery about allowing my son to go outside and play or engage with other children at the park, because I'm concerned that they may not always understand him And as a result, he may be bullied or may feel even more isolated, right? But these are experiences that you don't want to keep your child from having because they're inevitable. Regardless of if you are a neurodiverse person or not, we've all experienced rejection. We've all experienced isolation. We've all experienced disappointment, right? And those things, though inevitable, can also be great learning lessons if we allow them to be, if we allow the emotions to process themselves, gives us a great emotional stamina so that we are equipped to navigate a world that is not always built for us. And so, in placing my child in positions and spaces with other children, neurotypical children, not only are we teaching neurotypical children that people are different and no one is superior than the other, we're also teaching our child that you belong in any space as yourself. And you may get pushback and rejection, but it's important for you to keep showing up for yourself and not change who you are in spite of how people may feel about you, right? The other piece of that is that I've been incredibly wrong in many cases in which I've taken my child to play areas and I've seen, children embrace him and he's had great moments with peers his age. And so, quite frankly, I think I've said this before, like kids are much more normalizing of children who are different than adults are, which says a lot about how we are socialized and conditioned. So I hope that example is helpful for you in terms of like the acceptance piece is not passive, it's active because you have to intentionally place your child in positions where they feel safe and whole. And so their interest you celebrate, you place people around them who are like them and who are different from them, but still embrace who they are. And so finding those intentional ways to continue to uplift the difference, right? She goes on to write the importance of not parenting with a cookie cutter approach. And so oftentimes when it comes to coaching and parenting skills, we like to provide these frameworks and these approaches that have great advice and intention, but because every child is different, every parent is different, and every parent's trauma and experience is different, that there is no one size fit all. There may be some fundamental elements that come into place with parenting with our children, like conscious parenting. But essentially, the most effective parenting is learning who your child is and meeting them there and going on the journey alongside of them, right? So she writes that when you are able to respect the unfolding of your child's particular journey, you teach them to nurture their own inner voice and simultaneously honor the voice of others. To accept children requires disengaging from toxic life scripts and engaging each child on their level. Acceptance is foundational. If our children are behaving in a manner we deem to be quote unquote bad, out of a sense of defiance, the appropriate response is firmness. If they are being quote unquote bad because they are having trouble handling painful emotions, we need to be understanding that if they are needy and clingy, we may need to be cuddly and attentive. If they are boisterous and playful at an appropriate time, we need to allow them to bask in their joy without interference. This makes me think about when Khalil was younger, maybe like 2 or 3, and we were embarking on this journey of getting him assessed to see if he was on the spectrum because I had an inkling. They would ask a series of questions to create a summary to gather like what is the perception that the parent has of the child. And I remember being intentional about this, but also it came quite naturally that when they would ask me questions about Khalil, I always rooted my description of him in a way that was positive, that he was curious, that he was active, that he was humorous, he was goofy, that he was kind hearted. Because, first of all, I was very clear that what I perceive of my child, people are going to perceive of my child, but also what I perceive of my child, he was going to perceive of himself. But most importantly, how I perceive of my child is how I was going to engage with him, and it was going to inform what I fundamentally believed about him and what he was capable of doing. And so I always reminded myself to stay rooted in describing him in ways that were positive, because it reminded me that all children are pure and loving and deserve to be viewed from that place. Accepting of our children can take the form of any of the following, Dr. Shefali goes on to write. Accepting that your child is different in whatever way that looks, right? Accepting that your child is quiet. Perhaps they are stubborn. The word stubborn is a bad connotation, but it's actually not that bad because it's someone who is strong-willed and has strong opinions and wants to stick by their opinions, which is an indicator that they are connected to themselves, right? Sometimes the characteristics of our child are in complete conflict with who we are. Perhaps that's an area in our lives that we need to unpack and figure out why we are uncomfortable with it. Not diminish it in our child, accept it in our child, and then do the work to understand why it's in conflict with us, right? Again, going back to the idea that our children come into this world with the right to be themselves. I circled this one. I don't know if y'all can see it, but because I think I always go back to this as the reality. She writes, you will only accept your child to the degree that you accept yourself. You will only accept your child to the degree that you accept yourself. Not a lot of people are talking about this in the autism world, in the world of parenting children on the autism spectrum. There's so much talk around what we can do to accelerate our child's development, what we can do to get them to talk more, what can we do to get them to learn concepts more, what can we do to help with their meltdowns or to help with their social skills. And while those things are important, I also believe that we need to equally spend time with what can we do to unpack our feelings about our child who is on the spectrum, and are we fully accepting of ourselves and the life that we have as a parent of a child on the spectrum, right? If we're not accepting of that, then it will be a long, hard journey, okay? Accepting our children, Dr. Shefali goes on to write, for who they are brings with it another component, accepting the kind of parent we need to be for a particular child. How thankful am I that I let go of my desire to be the parent of my fantasy and instead became the parent my child needed me to be. She goes on to write that our ability to accept our children is directly linked to our ability to accept ourselves, both as we are presently and for what we have the potential to become. After all, how can we hope to raise our children to be thinkers and free-spirited if we aren't these things ourselves? My experience is different than that of a parent raising a neurotypical child, mostly because Khalil is less resistant to conformity, right? Not that I want to, but even if I wanted to, it will make this journey of parenting a lot more difficult if I spent time forcing him to be something that he is not, forcing him to align his behaviors to that of another child, right? Or align to the fantasy of what I think a child should be. He's much more resistant. Typically, children on the spectrum are, and that can be in many ways a gift for us as parents because it teaches us to surrender to who they are while still developing boundaries and discipline, which we're going to talk about in a minute. Dr. Shefali goes on to say, how can we raise another human being if our own being has been largely dismissed? When we are unable to accept our children, it's because they open up old wounds in us, threatening some ego attachment we are still holding on to. Now, that was a word. Ego attachment is basically this idea of being attached to how other people see you as opposed to how you are, right? And sometimes when we're so deep in our ego, we lose sight of the difference between the two. But it is simplest form. Being ego attached is being attached to concern of what others, how others are perceiving you, right? We believe our child is an extension of us, but in reality, they are in partnership with us, but they are their own individual, and they should be allowed space for that. But in the same way that we would want someone to accept us at our core fundamentally, some of us have lost sight of what that actually is because it hasn't been accepted. And so we've learned to show up as something that's more acceptable. However, when we begin to accept our core fundamentally, we offer that to our children. And so, in that way, it is a representation of us because they are operating in a confident place with unconditional love for themselves, right? When we mold our children to meet our expectations, we resist who they are, which is to sow the seeds of dysfunction. In contrast, to accept our children for who they are at any given moment brings a feeling of release and inner spaciousness, no longer defining ourselves by our need for control. We enter into kinship, beginning from where our children are, not from a place in our imagination. We are positioned to help them shape themselves in line with who they find themselves to be in their essence. I hope this is resonating and helpful to you all. Like, I know that some of the concepts can feel a little bit theoretical because a lot of it requires internal work. It is not tangible just yet. And it requires sitting with yourself and being honest with yourself and being in tune with yourself, which is the essence of parenting also. And that work is hard, which is why she says that acceptance is not passive. It is incredibly active because it requires you to be present and honest and raw. I'm going to end with this. She closes out chapter 3 by asking a series of questions. Do I really know who my child is? Can I create the space within myself to know my child each new day, one day to the next? To do this would require becoming silent in your child's presence, freeing yourself from all distractions, and attuning yourself to them in a state of curiosity and delight. I'm going to end there and say, actually, that's probably one of my favorite pastimes is just to kind of sit and watch Khalil play or eat and just kind of delight in his presence, in his purity. And I learned from that. I learned from him in that way, which is why we are constantly saying that parenting is a spiritual experience. It is a present experience, and it is constantly unpacking and letting go of social constructs that don't work for you or your child. Until next time, I feel like this was a long one, but I'm going to break it up into 2 parts. So until next time, please take care of yourself. I'm going to link the book in the bio as well as other resources that I hope will be helpful to you on your journey as a parent of a child who is either on the spectrum or neurodiverse in any way. Take care of yourself.